Welcome to Put Lid on It, a virtual event series about business, wealth, mindset, success, finances, and many other topics that can help entrepreneurs. Thank you for joining us in this webisode, where as always, we strive to empower women in business. And now, here's your host, Lydia Des Noyers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this month's webisode of Put Lid on It. I'm so excited about this one. We're going to talk about how our psychology and our mindset could help with our success or our failure. You decide. I'm here joined with two amazing psychologists, and I'll let them introduce themselves. But before we start, I want to remind everybody that Put Lid on It is an educational resource. We're not here to give any tax advice, medical advice, or any kind of professional advice. And you should consult with a professional before going into any kind of transaction. So that said, let's get started. Thank you so much to Dr. Vieux and Dr. Kim Arrington for joining us today. Two amazing psychologists, and I'll let you each introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do. And I'll start with Dr. Vieux since you're at the top. And by the way, Dr. Vieux is my cousin, so this is a family affair. Dr. Vieux, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Lydia. My name is Dr. Ulrick Vieux. I'm a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist. I'm currently the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at Garnet Health Medical Center, and I'm also the residency program director also at Garnet Health Medical Center. And besides my background in psychiatry, I also have a background in family medicine. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Dr. Kim Arrington, let's hear a little bit about you.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here. I am a clinical psychologist, and I also have a background in psychoanalysis. And I work with Dr. Vieux at Garnet Hospital, where I help to train the psychiatry residents in how to do psychotherapy. And I also train psychology interns and externs in all manner of things that have to do with psychology. And in addition to that, I run a women's health program here at the hospital, as well as an oncology behavioral health collaboration clinic. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for accepting my invitation. I am so excited about this topic. And, just a little bit of background as we discussed right before we went live. Put Lid on It is all about empowering business owners, especially women. And not, we're business advisors and a fractional CFO. And as a CPA, I'm always boxing like numbers, but I like to look at business holistically. And when I work with my clients, we work a lot on mindset and, psychology and I use those terms interchangeably. But, some of the self-limiting psychological things that impact our ability to grow our businesses and be successful and have a profit. And so I want to talk about that because it's not just selling a product or selling a service. There are so many other factors that are created up here that prevent us from being successful. So we heard the term imposter syndrome. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. And so what is imposter syndrome and how does it affect us?
So imposter syndrome is a term that sort of came about in the 70s as women began entering the workforce more. Mm-hmm. And it's a general feeling of not being adequate, of second guessing your competency. And in fact, it's been found that like many people experience this, not just women. I think they kind of left some things out of the definition. It became more pronounced with women entering the workforce, but in fact, many people, I've heard statistics up to like 80% of people at one point or another experience some feeling of imposter syndrome. I think the problem is with women in the workforce, they don't get enough support or enough positive feedback, so it gets exacerbated. So you see more of that with women than with maybe with men, who get more support for being outspoken or leaders, so that's kind of where it lies at this point.
Interesting. So there is you mentioned that it was when women started entering the workforce. So
in the 70s.
Okay. So, and then you mentioned it's because mostly men have support. What are some other factors? Are there any other correlations? Why is it that it's mostly women?
Actually, I think it's come to be determined that it's not mostly women, that most people experience some form of imposter syndrome at one point or another in their life. I think it just became more of an idea when women started entering the workforce because they didn't get enough support so that they were experiencing more intensive symptoms of imposter syndrome or more pronounced. It was like exacerbated. So that was the issue.
Okay.
Also,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, also to follow up what Dr. Arrington mentioned, there are also other aspects that kind of play into this role. It's kind of societal implications. So the reality of the matter is that women are overqualified. If you look at medicine, the majority of applicants are women. If you look at our residency programs, the majority of people going to residency program are women. So with that said, definitely the skill set is definitely there. But as Dr. Arrington said, there's this societal perception. In addition to dealing with imposter syndrome, we also have to deal with the aspect of emotional intelligence. What is emotional intelligence? I mean, emotional intelligence is basically 4 concepts that was defined by the Harvard Business School. And those 4 concepts are 1, self-awareness, 2, self-regulation, 3, social awareness, and 4, conflict management skills. Now, the key thing with emotional intelligence, leaders have said that if you have a high emotional intelligence IQ, that can be rated as a greater predictor of success than general IQ. Okay, so there are like a lot of metrics that we will utilize or what we define as an effective leader. But the reality of the matter is having a high emotional intelligence, having high empathy, these are actual concrete skills that actually determine true leadership skills. And oftentimes in the society that we live in, we may not necessarily recognize that. It's almost as if the narcissist, the flamboyant, grandiose personality, we define that as the leader. But in reality, these people are just fire starters. Out setting up fires and cleaning up their mess. But in reality, the true leaders are not often recognized and truly appreciated.
It's interesting because some elements of emotional intelligence, like empathy or being attuned to your team, are associated more with women. But again, it gets back to this I guess patriarchal structure that we've kind of adopted in American culture that doesn't support that enough, right? So that when women speak up, they're seen as too aggressive, or and
too emotional,
Yeah, too emotional, right? They're not getting the feedback that it's okay, and actually, it can be an asset to be attuned to your teams and your employees.
Yeah. Oh my God, there's so much. My brain is racing right now. Which is the next question. So, you mentioned being able to empathize with team members or people you interact with, and for a while that I think for some people they may see that as a weakness in the business environment. So can we talk about that a little bit? Why for so long it was seen as a weakness? And then you mentioned that it can actually be an asset. So where is that balance or that fine line of, the difference between too emotional or emotionally balanced or emotionally intelligent? And then, we talk about when we think about emotions, we always think about the women, right? And women have always been told, keep your emotions out of it. Keep your emotions out of the workplace, out of the business, out of interacting with clients or customers. And here we're talking about how it actually may be valuable. So can we talk about what that balance looks like? What is the difference, between being emotional and emotional intelligence?
I think being allowed to have the space to express that. And I think culturally, we need to work on how to shift what effective leadership looks like. And I think that's a hard thing to shift. But I think as more and more women enter the workforce and enter positions of leadership, they can have a say in how these things get developed and expressed. I think there could be more mentorship with women to allow that kind of dialogue to happen, because I think it is necessary, and I think it is effective leadership to be more supportive of your team and not just looking at the bottom line, I guess.
Right.
Also,
or understanding how that does affect the bottom line in a positive way, right? You have a successful team, they're going to show up, they're going to be productive, they're going to feel part of a team, and thereby improving your operations, productivity, and your bottom line, right? Yes. Okay, Dr. Vieux, you're about to say something. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, also add, all this also comes into the concept of respecting boundaries. For some reason, if a woman or a female leader is saying, respect my boundaries, that may be perceived in a negative way. Whereas if a male does that, that's a true leader. So I think, so being able to maintain boundaries, being able to actually have accountability, making sure that people are accountable. I think these are all things from a cultural perspective we have to basically deal with. I think female leaders should be able to identify their boundaries and also have the power to hold others accountable.
Right. So, this reminds me of a conversation. We actually had a webisode on diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And talking about the external factors, like the needing support, mentorship, having more dialogue about this. And in this conversation, how it's a little different is because now we're talking about the internal factors, right? What's going on up here. And so when you talk about women creating boundaries, we talk about imposter syndrome. That's all coming from our minds. What would you say in your experience, what causes that? What causes one person to have these mental barriers versus another person who doesn't have these mental barriers, is able to just go into a room, own it, and do what they do, set their price, and that be it. Work with their customers and feel confident. Whereas someone else with the same skills, same degree, same everything, but they're unable to. What in your experience, where does that come from?
Well, in psychoanalysis, we have a term called transference, and that really means sort of bringing your early experiences into the present. And we all are affected by our early experiences. So transference really respects the impact of those experiences on our behavior now. So, for example, I had someone I was working with whose mother was very punitive, very critical all the time. So and she's very bright, like you said, she's got all the skills. There's no reason why she shouldn't succeed, like on paper. But she would get into these very corporate settings, and any kind of criticism or feedback was taken as negative criticism. So she would become very defensive. She would get spiteful. She'd have difficulty working with her boss and her peers, because when we get into these situations, it evokes those older memories, right? So a boss can start feeling like a parent, right? So, and it's unconscious, we're not conscious of it. But these things we bring with us into the present. So positive and negative experiences from early on. So if you had a better
okay. I think we had some technical difficulties.
Like Dr. Vieux was mentioning before with emotional intelligence, we learn that stuff when we're small. We learn that stuff from our parents often. So if you had a better experience, you can bring that to bear in your work life. But if you had not so great experiences or challenges, then that's going to impact how you relate to other people, unless you've, done some therapy or some work.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and that's interesting because I've always heard a lot of the issues, and I'm being very I'm trying to be careful with my words, and I don't know if issues is the right term. I don't know if that's a clinical term, but a lot of the issues can be traced back to your childhood, and I often joke around when I say something. I'm like, it all started when I was 4 years old, but it seems to be true that it always can be traced back to childhood, and more specifically, you guys are the professionals, but is it from our parents? Is it always our parents, or is it just general childhood behavior? I mean, childhood, experiences?
Well, I would say it's probably a combination of all that. I think culture plays a major role. I mean, I can tell you, Lydia, we're cousins, so we come from the same. And just look at how we were basically brought up. I mean, there's an expectation of a cultural expectation of the females and a cultural expectation of the males, and just the way we're basically socialized. With that said, it's not an end game. I do think that these are things that we can work on. So, for example, I can tell you something that helped me a lot from a professional perspective, that helped me with insight, was when I had my own psychoanalysis. I did that for 3 years. It's something that I recommend all of my residents to actually go through your own therapy. And you say this because a lot of people, oh my God, why are you talking about me? I don't want to see a therapist. Is there something wrong with me? But the reality of the matter is that really successful people have their own therapist, males and females. It is not uncommon to see CEOs going through their own therapy. And I think that's important to kind of work through things. Dr. Arrington mentioned a really key point with the case that she spoke about. I mean, I often will see people that will actually engage in self-sabotaging behavior. They feel that, again, imposter syndrome, that I'm not worthy of the position that I have, and they will actively sabotage themselves without even being aware of that. So I think the issue of insight, the issue of making sure that therapy is something that's recognized. And again, it goes back to the dynamics and the financial reality of where medicine is right now. There was a report from Psychiatric News that came out yesterday that said that the number of psychiatrists that are actually doing therapy in their practice has diminished by 50%. So now people are more interested in just prescribing medications. That terrorizes me. I mean, I think that's awful, because when it comes to issues of imposter syndrome, when it comes to issues of emotional intelligence and actually developing that, that's not really a medication issue. That's really a therapy component. But making sure that people are actually aware and knowing how to find places to actually address these issues.
So you talk about when you gave us the 4 factors of emotional intelligence, and right now you just said being aware. Can we talk about that a little bit? Because there are some people who, you said, actively sabotage, right? That may look differently for different people. How about the subconscious or unconscious sabotage? We talk about people who procrastinate, who can't finish a task. Can we talk about that and how we can recognize the areas where we need to fix, work on? Let me not say fix, but areas that we can work on. What are some other attributes or things that perhaps are so subtle we don't even realize that these are areas that we probably need to work on?
Well, I think in my experience with the professional women that I've worked with, if there are unconscious blocks, what has helped is therapy sometimes helps, but also having like a job coach or
a business coach.
To kind of give feedback and support. There may be things, because I don't work in corporate America, that I don't see that sometimes a job coach can see. And, I think that's been really helpful for a lot of women, but we keep coming back to this kind of idea of support and mentorship, and giving, allowing people, saying it's okay to assert yourself, right? It's okay to charge more money for your services. It's worth it.
Right.
So sometimes they just need that voice to tell them, it's okay.
Right. And I do a lot of work, as I mentioned, with women in that particular area, right? And you get that when somebody's quoting a price to a potential client or whatever, they give their price, or if they muster up the energy to just say their price, and then they start to self-discount, right? Yep. And so, what would cause somebody to do that? And again, I'm not a clinician and stuff, but I just ask them why, what made you feel you had to do that? But is there a more, I don't want to say clinical, but is there, what would cause somebody to do that?
Well, I think one of the key things is the importance of mentoring. And sometimes mentoring is something that you may have to actively work at getting. I find that within the workforce, I think it's anybody's job, I think is really essential, is that you have to be able to identify at least one sincere friend within the workplace. And a sincere friend is a person that you can basically share your feelings, feel that you're kind of in a non-judgmental zone, and that person can kind of help identify some blind spots that you may have. Hence the issue of preventing the sabotage component that we spoke about. So I think that's a very, very important thing. I will say that one of the things that we try to incorporate within our organization for our attending and also for our residents is having a process group. A process group is where people, like-minded people, workers, the team, to get together, and it's kind of like this Las Vegas style perspective that everything that's basically said in the room stays in the room. And the key thing to make a process group really work, the quote unquote boss should not be a part of it. It should be everybody in the same level, and being honest and talking about these things, because that within itself can kind of minimize the self-doubt that many people have. And it going back to what you said, Lydia, about the price. If you don't know what your self-worth is, what can you do? Because many times the CMO or whatever, one of the worst things that can happen to a person, like whenever you go in an interview, in a negotiation situation, when they ask you what is your price, one of the biggest mistakes that people can make is, well, this is what I want, because oftentimes people will actually, say a price that's lower than what it's actually worth, So you can say, well, I want $80,000, but in reality, there was a budget to pay you $130,000. And that happens all the time. So being able to actually be able to and this is where the networking perspective is really vital. That's something that you need to do. Whatever field that you're in, you need to try to reach out within people within that field that can actually help guide you.
I think it's important, like Dr. Vieux was saying, about having a safe space to talk about these things, even with friends. I mean, there's been some research that talking about imposter syndrome, even with your friends, helps you feel less alone and more confident. Because, like I said before, most people at one point or another have experienced that. But I think, again, we're talking about a cultural shift, because for my generation, for sure, you didn't really talk about anything that you felt other people might see as weak. So it's like, I don't want to talk about my imposter syndrome, but the reality is most people have it or have had it. So kind of just talking about these things and learning about what your issues or your blind spots may be can be really helpful.
It's kind of concept of fake it till you make it, right? But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
But that can be problematic.
Yes. I wanted to go back to what Lydia was asking before about like where does this come from, and just reiterate like the transference things from our past. Bring that. So you said, why would somebody discount themselves? Well, maybe they felt discounted in some way by their environment when they were growing up. To Dr. Vieux's point, it's not an end game. We develop throughout our whole lives. That may change based on other input we get about ourselves, but sometimes these early relationships really can have an impact, a negative impact on how we see ourselves.
Right. So Dr. Vieux, we had talked about, in being leaders, right? Entrepreneurs. So we're, in essence, even if we don't have teams, we're still leading maybe external people during negotiations, or with our vendors or whatnot. You talked a little bit about organizational behavior, and I might be switching gears just a little bit. But it all comes down to psychology, because I think you mentioned the word narcissism somewhere there. Can we talk about that organizational behavior and leaders who are interacting with their team members? What role narcissism or organizational behavior plays in effective leadership? Can we talk about that a little bit? I know that's one of your areas of expertise.
Dr.
So,
Arrington, do you want to lead?
Narcissism. In my experience, people who, it's sort of like the inverse of imposter syndrome, right? It's like it's people who don't question their weaknesses enough. So unfortunately, some of these people with this kind of personality type ascend often to positions of leadership. And it can create environments that are difficult to navigate.
It's a tough one, I know.
I think, again, all roads lead back to finding support. And if you have, people on your team or people in powerful positions who have narcissistic types of behaviors, you will definitely need support in terms of navigating that.
Yeah, and I feel oftentimes those who do have that narcissistic mentality do not recognize that it's usually the people around them who are who are told how to adjust and manage that. And so speaking to that person, because it's like you said, it seems to be like an inverse, like where you have this group of people who are new to be told, hey, step it up a notch, and then you're telling another group of people, hey, tone it down a little bit. How do you get to that healthy balance? So, someone who's like, I do want to increase my price or what, and I'm using it as an example because, again, we're talking ultimately about the bottom line in your business, right? So someone wants to do that, but the fear of being misunderstood or, seen as a narcissistic person or someone who doesn't care about the person on the other side. What does that look like? What does that balance look like? How do we have those conversations? Or, it's such a tough conversation. I'm not even sure what the question is. I'm hoping you guys are following.
Because you mentioned the concept of being gaslit. This is gaslighting,
right?
And being able to do your research, know what your product, what you have to offer, and being consistent with that. And also, I think dealing with very powerful to be able to walk away when it becomes too toxic. Because the thing about the narcissist, they will eventually self-destruct. Okay, it happens all of the time. But the thing about, and the key thing about the narcissist and also the person with the imposter syndrome, both sets have blind spots. And this is why it's imperative not to isolate yourself. Really empowering yourself by making social contact,
Mhm.
I mean, if there's one thing that, I would like to bring forth during my short time with everybody here, is the importance of forming a good network
Mm.
in the organization that you're in, and outside of the organization that having a series of friends that can be very, very honest with you,
Mhm.
and having the emotional integrity to be able to take constructive criticism
Mhm.
and benefit from that, and learn from that.
I think the unfortunate part of people who have serious narcissism, serious issues, is they don't take the feedback, right? So
Mhm.
I think it is a matter of knowing when to walk away,
Yeah.
to protect yourself,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
that it's not you,
Right.
that's a hard thing sometimes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, this is again, I'm always trying to be careful with how I phrase things, but in your experience, I'm sure you've had experiences where you identify somebody there's room for improvement, right? Things need to be worked on, fixed, and I'm cringing because I know that's not the right word, but fixed or improved. But there are people who just cannot take that feedback. So I mean, I have my own personal friends who I just see as super amazing. I'm like, you could do so much better, and here's how you can do it. And there's every excuse in the book, right? If I do this, I might lose clients, or I can't do this, or I don't have the time to do this. How do we overcome that? So when you talk about having the network, so let's say the network exists, I'm part of this network, but I can't get through some of the people around me. How, in your experience, how do you work with that as the professionals, right? How do you deal with people who perhaps need the help more than they recognize they need help?
Yeah, I think it comes back to having a trusting relationship with someone. That could be a friend, that could be your colleagues, that could be a therapist. But it does require having a trusting relationship with someone where you can explore, what might be getting in your way, and, be open to feedback.
Right. Right.
People.
And
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
and basically, you talk about a person that's stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
and people will need to, I don't know if this is proper English, but unstuck themselves in their own time. Some people have to reach rock bottom. Like, see, why is it that people that I was mentoring are having better position, have a better quality of life than I'm having? Sometimes people need to have that self-reflection.
And there's got to be motivation on the part of the person. We might think they should be doing better, but they may not have that motivation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
if there's a conflict there and they want to move, then that's
Right.
something to work with. But
Right. You're absolutely right. When I have my consultations with prospective clients, I always gauge, are they ready to make that move? Do they recognize that they're stuck and need help? Because someone who doesn't recognize it or is not ready to make that move, when no matter what, you'll be talking to a wall, right? So yeah, I saw a question come up. Marcella, do you mind putting that question back up? Okay, can you overcome imposter syndrome, or is it something that stays with you for the rest of your life, and you just have to work on it?
I think some of us have more struggles with it than others. But I think for some people it will be with them for the rest of their lives, but that they can work on dealing with it by the things that we've been discussing today, by forming networks, by getting feedback and support for yourself. Especially if there's something wrong here, because imposter syndrome is about I don't feel like I'm doing well, but everyone else is saying I'm doing well, so there's something wrong. So that it's something that you can get support for. I think, unfortunately, historically, for women in corporate settings, that they haven't gotten that support, so they feel they get stuck a lot. But there's a lot more support out there than we realize. I know for some major corporations, they have women's women's empowerment groups that you could take advantage of. I know that they have groups that are dedicated to people of color, that you can get involved in, so that you get more feedback that you're kind of okay, because I think that's what's missing often for people in these settings. Feeling alone is
Exactly.
yeah.
And what Dr. Arrington said, that's a really valuable point. Understanding your self-worth. So I would highly recommend that for people that are interviewing at corporations, look to see if they actually offer the support network. And if they're not offering that support, maybe that's not the organization that you want to go to. But the reality of the matter is that, especially now with the fact that everybody's resigning,
the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
You have a skill set, and effective organizations are recognizing the value of not only recruiting talent, but also retaining talent. And this is something that an effective organization will actually put into effect.
That is a good point, because we talk about, again, the organization behavior and leadership, right? So again, transitioning from my last episode, we're talking about delegating and bringing on your team and building your team. So that's one of the things that people can look at when you're looking to enter an organization, right? So when you're interviewing or applying for. And so from, our audience being business owners and in that role of leadership, what are some other things that we can do to kind of, what is the support? What does it look like in the organization, right? Because I can already hear the pushback. I don't have the funding, I don't have enough money for that, or I don't have the time for that. We have work to do. We have clients to get to. Where do we have time to, foster and play care bears with our team? And I'm being very, these are things I can honestly hear people say, right? So from a leadership perspective, what are some things that we can do or we have to do to make sure we create that environment where, we have the emotional intelligence, we have the development, stuff like that? What are some things in a leadership role that we can do?
Well, I mean, what you're saying, this is the very personification of the BCG matrix, right? I mean, understanding from a leadership position, every time I can say from a physician perspective, every time I lose in attending, my organization is losing $500,000. When it comes to recruitment, bringing in people, basically bringing new people up to speed, right? So, this isn't about, playing tiddlywinks with people. It's affecting the bottom line. So this is what differentiates Case Western, the Cleveland Clinic, or Harvard Medical Center. They recognize that. They recognize the importance of creating avenues in which their talent excel, because fundamentally the responsibility of a leader is to put the people that have given you the honor of leading them, putting them in where they can excel.
Right.
Yeah, it's a little bit of playing the long game, right? It's not just the immediacy. And it's beautiful that people are starting their own businesses.
Yeah, excellent.
But with that, you get to set the tone, right? You get to implement emotional intelligence into the fabric of, the meetings, the way the company is structured. So, but it's a long game, right? You do need to you do need to think about it a bit first.
Right.
But like you said in the beginning, this all will affect your bottom line. This will make your business better. But it's kind of a long game. It's not just, okay, we have to, appease our clients. It's we have to make our business whole so that we can sustain ourselves and feel good and appease our clients and feel good about that. So, it's like sort of putting the thought in ahead of time about the structure of the organization.
Right.
because that's what's been missing historically, like
Mhm.
in, corporate settings. Like the structure is not women friendly, it's not people of color friendly, so it's you're missing you're missing so much creativity and so much, so many people's voices. You're losing,
Right.
in my opinion, right? So here you have this opportunity to create this very more inclusive and healthy
Mhm.
functioning
I,
business.
I love how you tied it directly to the bottom line, right? To
Mhm,
your numbers, your finances, right? Because you're absolutely right. The cost of turnover
mhm,
is high, right? So yes, you can argue, well, I don't have the funding, or I don't want to invest in development and the support groups and nurturing that environment that will keep my team here. But you have to think about the cost if that person's, leaves, if they don't feel committed, they don't feel valued. That cost of retraining, re-recruiting, looking at resumes, that is in a long run, probably more expensive than that. And even working with outside people, not just our teams, but as you mentioned, with negotiations, right? Having that emotional balance, that and understanding that, hey, listen, there's two parties to a contract,
Yeah.
and everybody wants what's best for them. And being able to, and I'm going to be very careful, not say take the emotions out of it, but manage the emotions,
Exactly.
right?
Like,
And
yeah.
right, because as I mentioned at the very beginning, a lot of times women are told you're too emotional. Emotions don't belong here. And here we're able to talk and have this environment where we say, well, look, there's healthy emotion, there's managing emotions, there's knowing when to bring it up and use it, you know, to benefit your business, and know when to stop. So I see a question here from Carrie and Dr. VL, I believe. How could a patient accurately appraise themselves, particularly as a woman, when emotional intelligence, speaking up, and confidence are deemed unacceptable for female figures and minorities specifically? Very true. It seems like external supports might provide insight, but might not provide ways to practically apply it in a workplace. So the question is, kind of what we're talking about is, how do we appraise ourselves? How do we vocalize and say, hey, look, I may need some help, but it's not acceptable for female figures, especially minorities. Right, Dr. Kim, I'm sure we heard angry Black woman. I am
Oh
so
gosh.
over that term, right? How do
Yeah, or this concept of pet to threat, like you're
Mm,
brought in and you're seen as more like a pet, like that. Oh,
mm,
she's here and this is
right,
great. We're like diverse, But
right,
then
right.
as soon as you start to speak up, then
Mhm.
you're a threat.
You're a threat. You're too aggressive. Yes,
That
yes, yes.
too. I'm like, I thought I was pretty nice when you're looking at me like
Yeah.
I'm attacking you. So it's really tough. It really is very hard, and it does come back to, yeah, your support network may not be able to have the answer, but they can support you through those spaces,
Mhm.
because it's we're not culturally at a place where women of color their voices are gonna be heard all the time. It's just we're
Mhm.
just not at a place as a culture where that's gonna happen. So again, coming back to support network, it's
Mhm.
not the answer to everything, but it will help you get through those
Right,
situations.
right.
Also, one thing that I do want to add, everything that they said, Dr. Arrington, is absolutely true. But I've seen situations where people have actually self-sabotaged
Hmm.
themselves.
Mhm.
And I think one of your jobs is to actually know who are your allies in an organization.
Hmm.
And the
Mhm.
key thing is not to minimize those allies. And I think
Mhm.
that's something that happens a lot. I mean, I could say in my private practice, I deal with a lot of professional athletes, and a lot of that stuff is self-sabotaging behavior.
Mhm. Right.
You know, you, you can't,
Yeah.
you can't just blame the man for every wrong action that you've
Mhm.
done. So there's
Mhm.
definitely that level of accountability, and
Mhm.
that's one of the issues when a person may have a personality issue, where like issue of the narcissist, or a person that is whatever, they're not able to actually take ownership on how their behavior is adversely affecting.
Right. All of these collide, right? Where
Yeah, exactly.
you do need that feedback. So,
Yeah, and
Dr.
accepting
Hughes,
that feedback.
you mentioned the process group, like
Yeah.
that's a safe space, a place where you can sort of get honest feedback.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I love that. Okay, so I told you that I warned you guys. This conversation can go on for hours, and we are approaching the end. So, what are some? Let's say as we part and go on with our days, what are, let's say, top 3 things from each of you guys that you would want somebody to walk away from from this conversation? We talk about process groups. What are 3 things, either from leadership or I'm not even going to restrict you. What are 3 things you would like our audience to walk away with today?
I would like the audience to walk away with imposter syndrome is not unusual. People have it. All kinds of people experience it. Very famous people have admitted they've had it. Maya Angelou, Albert Einstein, like really famous people. So talk about it with your peers, because most people have it. Establish a support network for yourself so that you can get honest feedback, and support for when you're navigating these spaces and these issues. So I'll stop there. That's what I'd like people to take away.
Appreciate that. Taking notes.
I would say, first of all, empowering yourself, and part of empowering yourself is forming a good support group, and part of empowering yourself is really being humble and learning what are your current weaknesses. So basically, turning your current weaknesses into strengths. That's a reality. So doing those things, and understanding your self-worth. Like what you may view as a tragedy today, tomorrow when you look at that same thing, you may actually look at it as a miracle. So I think that's really vital.
I love it. Lots of words of encouragement. Well, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much. This is such a conversation that needs to be had. And I hope our viewers, this is recorded, so we're going to share it and have, and hopefully everybody has a chance to kind of and hear what you had to say. So if anybody wanted to reach you, I believe we have either you're on LinkedIn, we can find you on LinkedIn. If anybody wants to reach out with some additional questions. And again, thank you so much. We thank you for the audience, for your, the audience and people who are participating and ask questions. And I feel like we could probably have a part 2, so I'll reach out. Don't worry, it won't be right away. I'll give you guys a room. But thank you all so much. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience. And we have some people saying thank you for that. So this is very valuable information. And with that, we'll see my audience next month. Bye.
Yeah. Take care.
Bye.